Hello my dear friends, here in the Military Summary channel. In this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about Kiev. We have a lot of very interesting statements that are coming from this area. Zelensky stated Russian oil refineries will pay an even higher price. At the headquarters, a decision was made to expand the geography of strikes by Ukrainian long-range weapons on the territory of Russia. So we can understand Zelensky because currently he has a lot of problems with Kupiansk, with Pokrovsk. The Russians are saying that they managed to encircle more than 10,000 soldiers, and he understands that most likely in coming days or maybe weeks he would be forced to fall back from these citadels, and of course this is going to be the biggest ever disaster and defeat for the armed forces of Ukraine and for Zelensky personally. So that is why he is seeking a path to find a way how to get a immediate victory, and most likely attacks deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation will be provided to the population of Ukraine and the Western countries as a victory, as the biggest victory ever. So we expect that Ukraine will attack deep inside of Russia, and most likely they will be able to damage or even to destroy some oil refineries. But the problem is that most likely, and I'm 100% sure, that Russia will strike back, and most likely the Russians will be able to deal even more damage than Ukrainians can even imagine themselves. Furthermore, we got this very interesting statement made by Zelensky's party. The Ukraine armed forces are on the brink of collapse. Some battalions no longer have infantry, Zelensky's party has admitted. Some battalions have almost no infantry. Out of 120 soldiers, only 7 are infantrymen. The rest are commanders or signalers, stated Gorbenko, a member of the Verkhovna Rada from the Servant of the People faction. Sometimes there are as many as 13 commanders for every soldier, and this leads to a situation where battalions are ineffective. So we believe that he is telling us the truth, because if we take a look at the line of combat contact, we see that Ukrainians currently have problems everywhere. There is not a single square kilometer where Ukrainians are counter-attacking or where Ukrainians have initiative completely in their hands. Ukrainians are completely in defense, and furthermore the Russians are advancing and forcing Ukrainians to fall back from their current positions. So now let's discuss the situation on the ground, and first let's talk about the Zaporozhye direction, about the western flank. Today we have adjusted the map. As you can see, this is the situation by the end of the 27th of October, and this is the situation by the end of the 28th of October. As you can see, the Russians managed to improve their positions in this part of the settlement of Primorska, and we came to this conclusion based on the video that was published by Ukrainian sources. Here we can see how 2 Russian soldiers were running through the settlement of Primorska, how Ukrainians managed to discover these 2 Russian soldiers, and then Ukrainians began bombing and attacking Russians with FPV drones. So this episode and this, let's say, video took place exactly in this area of the settlement of Primorska, and based on this video we came to the conclusion that the Russians, as you can see, managed to improve their position significantly. As of now, the Russians are trying to cut the northern part of the settlement of Stepnogorsk from supply and support, and most likely the Russians are going to outflank Ukrainians using these roads of attack. As soon as Russians establish physical control over the M18 road, then Russians will be able to intensify their attacks in the direction of the city by the name of Stepnogorsk. As of the 28th of October of 2025, the Russians are clearing this territory with FPV drones. During the previous 24 hours, we received lots of videos how Russians were attacking different equipment, communication equipment, and positions of the armed forces of Ukraine in this area. So we are waiting that in coming days or in coming maybe weeks, the Russians will try to finish the battle for this territory, and this will open the Russians opportunities to move further in the eastern direction with the purpose to attack the settlement of Orekhov from the west, because the Russians are going to attack Orekhov, and most likely from this direction, and most likely this is going to happen almost at the same time when Russians will finish the battle for the city of Gulay Polye. Now let's discuss the situation in this region. Several sources reported that Russians managed to improve their position significantly. If you remember, just yesterday, according to information we have, Russians managed to capture 3 villages in this area: the settlement of Novonikolaevka, the village of Privilne, and a small village of Yegorovka. And today the sources are saying that the Russians made significant progress on the ground. They moved further. The Russians decided not to stop. They decided to develop their offensive. And today the sources are saying that as a result of attack, the Russians answered the settlement of Danilovka, and currently there are very heavy clashes for this territory. If Russians take under control this village, then Russians would be able to cut physically R85 road that connected the settlements of Pokrovska and Gulyai-Polye. Ukrainians had a very huge portion of logistic exactly through this arteria. If Russians are able to cut this arteria, this can lead to unpredictable consequences to the armored forces of Ukraine and Gulyai-Polye. Then Ukrainians would be forced to rely just on the TO8-14 road for the logistic purposes, but we remember that currently the Russians are trying to advance from the village of Mala Takmachka also in the northern direction, with the purpose most likely to cut another logistic road that goes in this direction. So the situation here is getting very critical, and we see that now this battle is turning into the battle for the city of Gulyai-Polye. Now the Russians are trying to do everything they can with the purpose to prepare themselves and to get as much as possible better positions before the battle for this city. As for the Ukrainian side, during the previous days they were trying to bring additional forces to the south. On the Russian side of the river of Volcha, they're trying to concentrate themselves to create a critical mass with the purpose then to carry out counterattacks, but Russians control the situation, and when Russians see another concentration of forces, they began bombing and attacking this territory with all calibers they have. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Novopavlovka-Pokrovsk direction. During the previous 12 hours, additional changes on the ground were recorded in the area of the settlements of Udachne, Molodetska and Novosergeyevka. So this is the situation by the end of the 25th of October of 2025, and this is approximately the moment when Russians began their major offensive operation in the northwestern direction. By the end of the 26th of October, the Russians managed to capture this Butterfly stronghold, one of the most powerful strongholds in this area that Ukrainians used to control for a very long period of time, but somehow the Russians managed to force the Ukrainians to fall back from this territory. Then the Russians managed to improve their positions and to capture the Pokrovskaya mine, the strategical position, the former strategical position of the armored forces of Ukraine. Now Ukrainians are forced to fall back further in the northwestern direction. By the beginning of the 28th of October, the sources reported that the Russians began advancing along the railways in the direction of the settlement by the name of Podgorodny, which is already a part of the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. Furthermore, the Russians began advancing also in the direction of Mariivka in Bilyakivka, which are, let's say, a part of Novopavlovka fortified area. So the battle for Novopavlovka is going to start very soon, most likely, and this village would be attacked by Russians from 2 directions at the same time. Now let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk cauldron. The situation here is very difficult. The Russians managed to encircle up to 5,500 soldiers of the armored forces of Ukraine. So the Russians continue tightening the noose around the settlement by advancing from in the northwestern part of the city of Pokrovsk in the eastern parts of the settlement of Mirnograd. As for the previous 12 hours, we haven't received anything that can confirm additional progress on the ground. We just have lots of videos how Russians were attacking positions of the armored forces of Ukraine. But we are waiting for another report published by the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. Most likely today they will give us additional details about this cauldron, about the number of forces, and about Ukraine's attempts to break through the situation. Furthermore, Ukrainians continue their counterattacks in the area of the Shakhove pocket. During the previous 12 hours, additional changes were recorded. The Ukrainians managed to improve their positions, and currently the Ukrainians are trying to unblock the Pokrovsk agglomeration exactly from the northeast. Today, Ukrainians managed to improve their positions in the area of the settlement by the name of Zatishek by taking under control additional territories. Furthermore, the Ukrainians managed to destroy another, let's say, pocket, or that used to be pocket, with Russians in the area to the south of Kucherev Yar. Furthermore, Ukrainians are trying to counterattack Russians in the northwestern part of the settlement of Shakhove. So these is attempts, and these are attempts from Ukrainian side to unblock the contingent of Ukrainians on the territory of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. At the same time, the Russians continue advancing and continue making their attempts to capture the settlement of Shakhove. We need to understand one thing: if Russians can capture the settlement of Shakhove, then Russians will not care about anything to the further to the west, in the northern and the northwestern directions, because Shakhove is the key settlement here. If Russians can capture the settlement and to maintain the lines and to shorten the lines and to shorten the defense, then it will be very difficult for Ukrainians to unblock their, let's say, allies on the territory of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. And during the previous 24 hours, the Russians carry out several attacks in this direction using tens of armored vehicles and infantry fighting carriers and tanks. So there were at least 2 routes of attacks that the Russians were using. In this video, we can see tanks and infantry fighting carriers that were heading towards the settlement of Shakhove from the east. And the Russians, one of the geolocation was spotted exactly at this point, so we see that Russians were trying to move in the direction of the settlement of Shakhove to its part, which is located on the Russian side of the river of Kazyony Torets. Most likely Russians managed to land infantry. Maybe there are already very heavy clashes for this small street, and this is the first task of Russian forces. Another group of Russian units were moving a bit further, trying to outflank the settlement of Shakhove and to cut the road between the village of Shakhove and the settlement of Sofiivka. So this is the situation on this flank. We see Ukrainians are doing one thing, the Russians are doing another thing, but everybody has the same purpose. Russians want to fortify and to strengthen their positions here. The Ukrainians are trying to unblock the encircled contingent. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Sivers-Liman direction. During the previous 12 hours, additional changes on the ground were recorded in the area of the city of Liman. So this is the situation by the end of the 27th of October, and this is the situation by the end of the 28th of October. According to information we have, the Russians are advancing from the settlement of Zarichne in the western direction with the purpose to attack Ukrainians, let's say, on the line between the settlements of Stavki and Liman. Currently, the distance between the city of Liman and edge positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation is already less than 4 kilometers, and positions between Russians and Ukrainians in the area of the village of Stavki from its southeastern direction is already less than 2.6 kilometers. The Russians are getting closer and closer, and the Russians are tightening the news around the city of Liman. Furthermore, the Russians improved their positions around the settlement of Novosilovka. Now the Russians are advancing in the direction of Alexandriivka. This is a very important settlement that lays on the main logistic lines between the mainland and the Barovo-Liman direction. So it is very important for Russians to get as deep as possible to this forest, to the Svetogorsk forest, and to cut logistics in this region. And this is exactly what the Russians are doing right now. As for the northern directions, during the previous 12 hours, additional changes were recorded in the most northeastern part of the Kharkiv region. The Russians improved their positions. This information was provided by neutral mappers, and we see that Russians are advancing in the direction of the settlement Dvorechne. The Russians, as we can see, are tasked to unite these two footholds along the river Oskol and along the border, and most likely this is going to happen in coming days or probably in coming 2 or 3 weeks. And that's it for the short video. Military with Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.